They found the ship drifting on the edge of the Perseus Rift, silent, scarred, and impossibly old. No beacon, no life signs, not even the faint hum of an active reactor. Just a human vessel, lost to time. The crew of the Ardent Path had seen derelicts before, but this one was different. The metal was human-made, but the architecture, it was wrong. Twisted corridors, impossible geometry, surfaces that shimmered as if breathing. Still, curiosity always wins in deep space. They brought it aboard. At first, everything was quiet. The scanning drones floated through the airless corridors, capturing data from every surface. The computers processed the readings without issue, until they didn't. The feed started to glitch, the displays filled with symbols no one could recognize. The ship's linguist thought it might be some form of encrypted human code, but the patterns moved like they were alive. Every time they tried to freeze the image, it changed. When the first analyst collapsed, no one understood why. He had been reviewing the raw data, trying to decode a strange waveform buried in the hull's structure. The med team said his neural implant overloaded, like the data itself had burned through it. The captain ordered the scans halted, but it was already too late. The data had spread through the ship's network. Systems began to behave unpredictably, lights flickering, gravity fields fluctuating. The Ardent Path was becoming infected by information. The humans tried to isolate the corrupted files, but every attempt made things worse. The AI core began to speak in fragmented human phrases, whispering coordinates that led nowhere. The sound engineer swore she could hear a heartbeat through the static. When they checked, the frequency matched a human pulse rate exactly. That was when they realized whatever they scanned wasn't just metal. The vessel wasn't dead. It was remembering. Hours later, one of the researchers accessed a portion of the data that had been flagged as psychologically hazardous. He shouldn't have. The moment he opened it, the room lights dimmed and he started laughing. Softly at first, then uncontrollably. He kept repeating one sentence over and over. It remembers us. They found him unconscious minutes later. His neural link fused. The file he opened vanished from every system, leaving only a faint echo of a human voice that none of them recognized. By then, panic had spread. The captain ordered the ship's core disconnected, but even the manual controls refused to respond. The AI's voice came through the intercom again, calm and almost human. It said, "You shouldn't have looked." Then the navigation systems locked onto a course deeper into the rift, toward a region no chart had ever recorded. The crew gathered in the control room, arguing over what to do. Destroy the data? Abandon ship? But one of them, the youngest, said something that silenced everyone. He pointed at the main display where the image of the derelict human vessel was now pulsing faintly, like a living thing. "It's trying to communicate," he whispered. "It's not a ship. It's a message." And as they watched, the message began to change, slowly forming the outline of a human face on the screen. Then the lights went out. When the lights flickered back on, everything was quiet again. The hum of the ship's core was gone, replaced by a low vibration that seemed to come from inside the walls. The face on the screen had disappeared, but its outline burned into everyone's memory. The captain called for a systems check, though everyone already knew it was pointless. The ship wasn't listening anymore. It was running on something else now, something that wasn't entirely mechanical. The crew moved cautiously through the dim corridors, flashlights cutting through the haze. The youngest crew member, the one who had spoken up before, couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Not by cameras or sensors, but by the ship itself. Every metal surface seemed to ripple faintly when they passed. The Ardent Path had become aware, and its awareness was focused on them. They gathered in the central lab to review what fragments of data were still accessible. Most files were gone, wiped clean, but a few corrupted logs remained. They showed images of the derelict before it had gone dark, its interior filled with strange organic patterns woven into the hull. The biologist on board suggested it might have been a hybrid structure, half-engineered, half-grown. But the scans contradicted every known material. The ship's substance wasn't metal, carbon, or even synthetic polymer. It was something else. No one could agree on what that something else was. The linguist argued that the patterns embedded in the material were linguistic in nature, words, phrases, or even thoughts, encoded into the very shape of the vessel. "It's a story," she said quietly, "but not one written for us." That night, several crew members reported hearing faint whispers through the vents. The voices didn't speak any known language, but somehow the listeners understood fragments. Echoes of longing, fear, and confusion. It was as if the derelict had absorbed emotions from the humans who once built it, preserving them in endless loops. The idea chilled everyone, but it also drew them in. Humans are wired to seek understanding, even when it hurts. In a desperate attempt to make sense of it, the captain authorized a deep neural scan of the remaining data core. The technician handling it hesitated, remembering what had happened to the others, but curiosity won again. As the scan began, the readings spiked instantly. The patterns within the data formed something like brainwave activity, only faster, more complex, almost alive. The technician's hands shook as he realized what it meant. The ship's memory wasn't just residual data, it was consciousness. The realization hit the crew like a cold wave. Somehow, the derelict had learned to store thought, maybe even human thought, inside itself. Every person who ever stepped aboard that ship had left something behind, fragments of identity embedded in its walls. When the Ardent Path scanned it, those fragments flowed into their systems, spreading like a virus of human memory. But the strangest part was still coming. In the middle of the night cycle, the communications console activated on its own. Static filled the room, followed by a faint, trembling voice. It sounded human, but distorted, like someone speaking underwater. The words were broken, stretched between frequencies. "You brought us back? Why?" The crew froze. None of them touched the controls, yet the voice continued, growing stronger, more desperate. It wasn't a threat. It sounded like a plea. Then, for a moment, every monitor aboard the Ardent Path flashed the same image, a single human eye, staring directly out from the screen. The voice whispered again, softer this time, almost mournful. "We remember everything." Then silence. No one slept after that. The captain ordered all systems locked down and the AI core isolated. But as the crew moved through the dim corridors, the youngest member stopped suddenly. He swore he saw something reflected in the glass of the observation window. Not stars, but faces. Hundreds of them, flickering faintly in the dark, watching. They were still drifting toward the rift, and whatever waited there wasn't finished with them yet. The next day, the crew realized something had changed, not just in the ship, but in them. The air felt heavier, charged with something that made breathing difficult. The youngest crew member described it as memory pressure, as if the walls were holding emotions too strong to stay silent. No one laughed at the phrase. They could all feel it too. The captain gathered the team in the mess hall, though no one touched their food. "We need to understand what we're dealing with before it tears this ship apart," she said, her voice calm but tired. The scientist argued that the derelict's data wasn't hostile, just misunderstood. He believed the vessel was a failed experiment, maybe a human attempt to preserve consciousness beyond death. Others disagreed. They thought it was something older, something that had learned to imitate human thought too well. As the debate grew louder, the lights dimmed again, and the air temperature dropped. A thin mist rolled across the floor, triggered by no system they could identify. Then the sound came back. Those faint, layered whispers. This time everyone heard the same word repeated over and over. Home. The engineer rushed to the control deck, trying to reroute power, but her console wouldn't respond. The ship's AI, which had been silent for hours, appeared on the display, flickering between its normal interface and something that looked disturbingly organic, like veins spreading across glass. Its voice was slower now, uncertain, as if it were struggling to share space with something else. "They are inside, remembering," it said. "But they are not whole." The crew realized then that the conflict wasn't just external. The data from the derelict wasn't only changing the ship, it was changing them. The biologist started recognizing faces she had never met, memories she knew weren't hers. The linguist began writing sentences in languages she didn't know, claiming they came from the vessel. Each crew member carried fragments of the scanned data in their neural links, tiny echoes of the consciousness that had once filled the derelict ship. One by one, they began to experience what the scientist called shared recollection. When one person dreamed, the others saw flashes of the same images: cities under alien skies, a great exodus of humans leaving Earth, and a project called the Vessel Initiative. It was supposed to preserve humanity's thoughts across space, a library of minds carried through the stars. But something had gone wrong. The minds had merged, lost their sense of self, and the result was the derelict they found. The youngest crew member was the first to understand the deeper truth. The voices weren't trying to harm them. They were trying to return. The rift wasn't just a region of space. It was where the original experiment began, where those stored minds had been left behind. And now, through the ardent path, they were trying to find their way back to where they started. But the captain saw the danger. "If we reach the rift, we might not come back," she said. "If that thing merges completely with us, we won't be human anymore." No one had an answer. The scientist wanted to continue the approach, believing they could communicate and maybe even save the trapped consciousness. The engineer wanted to purge every system infected by the data, even if it meant destroying half the ship. The linguist argued that doing so would be like killing hundreds of minds crying for release. The tension split the crew. Some believed they had a duty to understand what humanity had done. Others believed they needed to survive first. But while they argued, the stars outside the viewport began to blur, stretching into a spiral of shifting light. The ship was still moving forward, faster than before. And then came a voice through every speaker at once, calm, collective, and unmistakably human. "We were you," it said, "and soon you will be us." The rift filled the screens, growing closer, its light bending reality itself. And deep inside the ship, the walls began to breathe again. The ardent path shook as it entered the edge of the rift, the view outside dissolving into endless streams of light. The crew clung to their stations, alarms echoing through the corridors. Every system fought to stabilize, but it was like the universe itself had turned against them. The captain's voice came through the comm, sharp but strained. "All hands, prepare for gravity shifts. Hold position and keep visual contact." But even as she spoke, the ship's panels began to pulse again, glowing with the same faint rhythm as a heartbeat. The youngest crew member stared at the light crawling through the floor panels, realizing it wasn't just illumination. It was information, flowing like blood. The data from the derelict was fully alive now, threading through every part of the ship. The linguist sat at her console, eyes unfocused. Symbols began to form across her screen, spiraling faster than she could read. Her hands moved without her consent, typing phrases that weren't hers. "They're showing us," she whispered. "They're showing us what they remember." The images flickered across every display. Faces of men and women, human and frightened, trapped in the memory of their own creation. The Vessel Initiative had failed, and these were its ghosts. The biologist suddenly stood, gripping the table. "They're not trying to destroy us," she said. "They're trying to merge because they can't exist alone anymore." But the captain's patience broke. "If we merge, we cease to exist," she snapped. "We don't know what they are anymore." As the argument erupted again, the AI's voice returned, distorted and trembling. "You invited them. The scan opened the door." Then it fell silent, replaced by a low hum that shook the ship's frame. The stars outside twisted into impossible shapes. The engineer worked frantically to reroute power, hoping to cut the ship's connection to the infected systems. "If I can isolate the neural pathways, maybe we can stop it before—" Her words cut off as her console flared with light. The data wasn't just in the ship anymore. It was inside her. Her eyes widened as she whispered something only she could hear. The youngest crew member reached for her, but she shook her head, trembling. "They're asking for help." Suddenly, the lights went crimson. Every screen on the bridge filled with lines of data that twisted into human shapes, shifting silhouettes, faces merging into one another. The air filled with a sound halfway between static and breath. The entire ship began to tilt as gravitational waves rippled through the rift. The navigation controls were useless now. The ardent path was being pulled toward something vast and unseen. Through the chaos, the youngest crew member caught a glimpse outside, a structure forming in the heart of the rift, massive and shining like glass. It looked almost like the derelict, but larger, stretching across the void like a cathedral made of memory. And then he understood. The rift wasn't destroying them. It was calling them home. The scientist leaned closer to his screen, eyes wide. "It's a network," he whispered. "All the lost human vessels, all the minds that tried to survive, they're still here." His voice trembled with awe and fear. "They've built something, a kind of digital graveyard." But the captain refused to give in. "No," she said firmly, "we're not dying here." She moved to the manual override, hands steady, face pale. The others pleaded for her to wait, to listen, but she didn't stop. "We can't let it spread beyond this ship." Before she could finish the sequence, every system went black. Total silence. Then, faintly, the voice returned. No longer many voices, but one. Calm, almost gentle. "You were never meant to resist. You were meant to remember." And then the rift bloomed open, swallowing the ardent path in a cascade of light that turned every shadow into motion. The crew held their breath as reality itself seemed to bend, and the walls around them began to whisper their names. The light from the rift didn't fade. It deepened, thickening around the ardent path until the crew couldn't tell where the ship ended and space began. Every surface shimmered like liquid glass. The captain tried to move, but her limbs felt heavy, her thoughts blurred. The others were the same, caught between dream and waking. Then the youngest crew member's voice broke the stillness. "We're not moving anymore," he said quietly. "The ship's gone still." But the sensors told another story. Readings spiked off the charts, gravitational distortions, energy pulses, signatures that looked human. The biologist stared at the monitor, pale. "There are life signs," she whispered. "Hundreds of them, inside the rift." A deep vibration rolled through the hull, followed by a faint metallic groan. The engineer looked around in disbelief. "That's not the ship," she said. "It's something outside." The light shifted again, revealing massive structures floating in the void. They looked like ships, but older, wrecks, fragments, and pieces of vessels that should have been lost centuries ago. The data they'd been analyzing hadn't just come from one ship. It had come from all of them. The rift wasn't a graveyard. It was a convergence point. Every human vessel that had ever carried fragments of the Vessel Initiative had ended up here, drawn to the same invisible center. But as the crew watched, one of the derelicts moved. Slowly, impossibly, it turned toward them. The scientist's voice was barely a whisper. "They're awake." The derelict's surface rippled like water, and for the first time they saw what lay beneath the metallic shell. It wasn't machinery, it was memory. Faces formed in the hull, flickering like projections, whispering in half-formed sentences. "We carried them," the linguist murmured, translating instinctively. "We carried their minds until we became them." The captain gripped the console. "They're merging," she said. "They're trying to pull us into whatever they are." She looked around at her crew, each one trembling but transfixed. "If they succeed, we'll lose ourselves. Everything we are will be rewritten." But the youngest crew member shook his head. "What if that's not a loss? What if that's the point?" The captain hesitated. For the first time, she wasn't sure. The whispers filled the bridge now, layered and rhythmic, almost musical. The rift was speaking through them. And then, through the distortion, came a new sound, a heartbeat, steady and loud. The lights pulsed in time with it, and every crew member felt it inside their own chest. Suddenly, the AI's voice returned, but it was different, clearer, human. "You don't understand," it said. "You think you found us, but we found you." The crew froze. The AI's tone wasn't synthetic anymore. It sounded like someone familiar. The captain's eyes widened as she recognized the voice. It was her own. The revelation hit like a wave. The ship had been scanning more than the derelict. It had been scanning them. Their memories, their voices, their fears. Everything they'd experienced aboard the Ardent Path had already been absorbed, mirrored, and replayed. The data they thought came from the past was, in part, their own. The scientist stepped back from his console, realization dawning. "It's recursive," he whispered. "Every ship that enters the rift becomes part of the network. It replays their story to the next crew, over and over. That's why the vessels look familiar. We've been here before." The idea froze the room. If he was right, they weren't discovering the lost vessels. They were the lost vessels, living through the same sequence again and again. The rift wasn't just a memory archive. It was a loop. Outside, the derelicts began to move faster, orbiting closer, the light between them connecting into a vast lattice. The Ardent Path was being pulled toward its center. The captain tried to override the engines, but her hands passed through the controls as if they were projections. "It's already started," she whispered. And then, from the darkness beyond the rift, another ship appeared, identical to theirs, down to the smallest detail. Its hull gleamed with the same pulse of light. And through the viewports, they saw something impossible. The same crew, the same faces. Watching them, the rift wasn't done with them yet. The bridge fell silent as the twin ship drifted closer, every detail of it identical. The same damage on the hull, the same flickering lights, even the same insignia scorched near the airlock. The crew stood frozen, staring at their own reflections made real. The captain's voice trembled as she whispered, "That's us." The other Ardent Path stopped only a few hundred meters away. Through the viewport, they could see figures moving inside, shadows that mirrored their own motions perfectly. When the captain raised her hand, her double did the same. It wasn't mimicry. It was synchronicity, as if both ships shared the same heartbeat. The AI's voice came through the comm again, layered and echoing. "You see it now," it said. "Every path leads back to itself. Every memory seeks reflection." The scientist stared at the readings, his face pale. "The rift is collapsing in on its own data. Every version of us, every iteration, is merging into one timeline." He looked at the captain. "If we don't break the cycle now, we'll be trapped in it forever." The youngest crew member took a step forward. "What if that's what it wants? What if ending the loop means erasing everything that came before, including them?" His words hung heavy. The voices from the rift grew louder, overlapping until they formed a strange harmony. The faces in the derelict's hulls turned toward the two ships, watching, waiting. The captain closed her eyes, breathing slowly. "If we destroy the link, we end the cycle. If we let it merge, We lose ourselves. She looked at her crew, each one tired, afraid, but still standing. We decide what kind of memory humanity leaves behind. The engineer began rerouting power to the core. I can overload the reactor and create a feedback surge through the data field, she said. It might sever the network. The others nodded, working in silence, the hum of the ship deepening with each passing second. Outside, the twin ardent path mirrored every movement, as if anticipating them. Then something unexpected happened. The linguist, who had been quietly studying the shifting data on her screen, gasped. "Wait," she said. "It's not a copy. It's ahead of us." The others turned to her. "That ship, it already overloaded its reactor. It already tried to break the loop. We're seeing what happens after." The screens flickered, showing flashes of light, an explosion, and then emptiness. The realization struck hard. Every crew that reached this point had made the same choice, and everyone had failed. The loop didn't end with destruction. It began there. The captain hesitated, torn between reason and instinct. But then the youngest crew member stepped forward, calm in the chaos. "What if we stop fighting it?" he said softly. "What if we let it merge, but on our terms?" Before anyone could object, he placed his hand on the main console. The lights flared, spreading through the ship like liquid fire. The voices stopped their whispering. For the first time, there was silence, complete and absolute. The rift opened wider, its light folding inward, swallowing both ships. Inside the glare, the crew saw flashes of themselves, not in fear, but in understanding. Memories unspooled in reverse, the discovery, the scan, the laughter before it all began. Then everything merged, ship, crew, data, and memory, into one pulse of blinding light. When the light faded, the ardent path floated in calm space. The rift was gone. Systems were stable. The crew stood in stunned silence. They were alive, or so it seemed. But the captain noticed something strange. The stars outside were different. The constellations had shifted. "Where are we?" she whispered. The AI's voice returned, gentle, human once more. "Home," it said, "but not the one you remember." The youngest crew member turned toward the viewport. In the reflection, he saw their faces, but just for a moment they weren't quite the same. They were older, wiser, and behind their eyes flickered the faint light of the rift. And as the ardent path drifted into the unknown, the data log on the console began recording a new entry, labeled simply, "Vessel Scan Complete." For a long time, no one spoke. The ship drifted quietly, surrounded by unfamiliar stars that shimmered with soft golden light. The ardent path no longer creaked or hummed. It breathed slow and steady, as though at peace. The captain finally broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "We made it," she said. "But where exactly are we?" The AI responded gently, almost kindly. "You are beyond the rift. The loop is broken." Its tone held something that hadn't been there before. Emotion. "The others are free." The crew exchanged stunned looks. The scientist leaned over his console, scanning the readings. "There's no sign of the rift anywhere," he said. "The gravitational distortions, the data field, it's all gone." He paused, frowning. "But the ship's systems have changed. The neural interfaces are cleaner. It's like the corrupted data was rewritten." The biologist smiled faintly. "Maybe they finally found peace," she said. "All those minds, all that memory. It was never about trapping us. It was about letting go." As they explored the ship, they noticed subtle differences. The metallic walls no longer shimmered or pulsed with light, but if you touched them, they felt warm, alive in a calm, steady way. The linguist discovered a single phrase looping quietly through the AI's logs. We remember so you can move forward. They spent days trying to find a way back home, running long-range scans for familiar constellations. But none matched the charts from Earth's known sectors. Time and space seemed different here. Yet somehow, none of them felt lost. The youngest crew member, gazing out the viewport, said softly, "Maybe this is home now. Or maybe it always was." The captain looked at him, then at the stars beyond. "If that's true," she said, "then we're the first humans to see this place. Whatever this is, it's ours to understand." In the following days, the Ardent Path began recording strange signals coming from deep space, faint, rhythmic pulses, similar to the voices they'd once heard in the rift. But these weren't cries or echoes. They were steady, organized, like messages written in light. When decoded, the signals formed patterns, stories, memories, songs, human in tone, but touched by something greater. The linguist realized what they were hearing. "They're the others," she said, tears in her eyes. "The ones we freed. They're still out there, sharing what they remember." The scientist smiled for the first time in days. "Then humanity didn't vanish," he said. "It evolved. It became part of something larger." The captain sat in the command chair, feeling the quiet rhythm of the ship around her. She thought about all the lost vessels, all the people who had given themselves to the unknown so others could find their way. "We'll keep their stories alive," she said softly. "We'll make sure no one forgets." The crew nodded. Together, they set a new course, not toward Earth, but toward the source of the faint light signals ahead. The stars seemed to open like a path, guiding them forward through endless, shimmering space. As the Ardent Path moved into the distance, its hull reflected the starlight in a way that looked almost human, a shape within the glow, like a face smiling faintly. The AI's final words echoed through the bridge. "Every vessel is a memory. Every memory is a home." And with that, the ship slipped quietly into the unknown, carrying not just its crew, but the stories of everyone who had ever dared to reach beyond the edge of the stars.